Getting your layers right isn't just about comfort, it's about safety and extending your bottom time in cold water. When you're warm, you're focused. When you're cold, you're thinking about ending the dive and hoping for safety. 20 minutes into your first cold water dive, and you're already shivering in your premium dry suit. And you start wondering if you got scammed. But here's the part nobody tells new dry suit divers. The dry suit usually isn't a problem. The mistake is hidden underneath it, and it can wreck warmth, trim, and your ability to stay calm when conditions get real. I'm Don, and in the next few minutes, I'll show you the exact insulation layering decisions that separate a comfortable cold water dive from a dive you end early from the cold if you're wearing a dry suit. This of course doesn't apply to wetsuits, but stick around as you might find yourself leaning towards a dry suit by end of this video. Let's start with why your sweatpants or cold weather gear is sabotaging your dives. Most divers make the same assumption. If it feels warm on land, it will certainly feel warm underwater. That assumption is wrong for one reason. Pressure and moisture changes what insulation can be. Not to mention what you wear under your dry suit affects your trim characteristics in significant ways. There's this idea that you can throw on some warm clothes under your dry suit and call it good. Sweatpants, a hoodie, maybe that puffy jacket you use for skiing. I call it the James Bond fallacy, because it assumes you can just wear a fancy suit under your dry suit and everything will work perfectly. But it doesn't. First of all, you need insulation to keep you warm, and under pressure, insulation behaves differently. On land, loft, like this thick loft here, traps gas and slows heat loss. Underwater, suit squeeze reduces loft, and if you don't add enough suit gas to relieve the squeeze, casual layers often collapse in ways that make warmth and buoyancy inconsistent. Down, for example, can be even worse. It's fantastic when dry because it holds loft, but when it's damp, it clumps and loses most of its insulating value. Like this here would be pretty useless if it gets just a little bit wet. And in a dry suit, damp happens from sweat, small leaks, and condensation. Specific materials like Thinsulate, wool, and high-density fleece function differently. They use hydrophobic fibers that resist water absorption and tend to retain insulation better when damp. And Scuba-specific materials are designed to retain more insulating performance and under compression than casual clothing litters, especially when you maintain appropriate suit gas to preserve loft. A 400 Thinsulate style undergarment is often shorthand for an insulation weight rating around 400 grams per square meter in many systems, not the total garment weight. But here's where it gets interesting. Street clothes can create buoyancy and trim problems, like this sweatshirt, for example. Loose sweatpants, bulky seams, and elastic cuffs can encourage uneven suit gas distribution, which can contribute to floaty feet or uneven trim. And if you don't believe me, give it a try. Wear a t-shirt and some sweatpants on a dive and you'll be seeing how fast you can get floaty feet. There were times where I tried to dive in sweatpants alone and had to struggle to not do a frontal somersault. Scuba undergarments are designed as a one-piece suit for high-waisted layers, specifically to reduce pinching and to help suit gas distribution more predictably, improving trim and comfort. You quickly find that a one-piece scuba-specific undergarment with equal buoyancy characteristics solves a lot of concerns. Now let's talk about the physiology of getting it wrong. Most divers worry about being too cold, but overheating is just as dangerous. If you layer too heavily and start sweating before you hit the water, that moisture sits against your skin, then cools you faster once you descend. Sweat also contributes to dehydration, which can impair your temperature regulation and increase fatigue. There's also a decompression consideration. Being cold during ascent and stops can reduce circulation and slow inert gas elimination, which can increase decompression stress, leading to your decompression model not being conservative enough and higher risk of decompression sickness if you don't decompress longer. But being too hot during the bottom phase increases peripheral circulation, which can increase the inert gas uptake. So proper thermal management isn't just about comfort. It's a safety issue. It's about managing your physiology throughout the entire dive profile. That said, this is not a reason to intentionally get cold. Hypothermia is a safety problem in its own right. The practical goal is stable comfort across the dive, especially staying warm during ascent and stops. The goal is to stay warm enough that your body doesn't have to work to generate heat, but not so warm that you're sweating before you descend. That's the sweet spot. That balance starts with understanding what goes directly against your skin. So if warmth is pressure, moisture, and gas management, your first decision is not your insulation, it's what touches your skin. And if you're enjoying this video, now is a great time to like and subscribe. If you find this information valuable, share it with others. I post weekly content to help divers grow their skills, build confidence, and explore the ocean with curiosity and care. And if you're interested in a free newsletter that covers the latest and greatest in the dive industry, you can subscribe in the description below. I'll see you there. Most people think the base layer is about warmth. It's not. In fact, it can be quite thin and provide no warmth. It's about moisture. And moisture is the fastest way to turn a warm undergarment into a cold one. If you get this layer wrong, you can spend all your money on a thick insulation that's top notch and still shiver. Your base layer's job is simple. Pull moisture away from your skin. When you sweat during setup or exertion, that moisture needs to move outward, away from your skin, not sit against your body, creating a cold, clammy layer. The good news is, you don't need an expensive Scuba branded base layer. Any quality of synthetic or merino wool long underwear can work well. Even this rash guard might prove just fine. Athletic wear and clothes can tend to be designed to pull moisture from the skin as well. Merino wool tends to resist odor and stays warm when damp. Synthetics like polyester or polypropylene dry faster and are often more affordable, but they can smell if not dried quickly. The one material you need to avoid is cotton. Cotton absorbs moisture and holds it. Once wet, it loses insulating performance and becomes a heat sink, which will suck the heat right out of you. If you're wearing a cotton t-shirt under your dry suit, you're greatly increasing the odds of a cold, clammy dive. And fit matters too. Your base layer should be snug, wrapping your skin closely, but not restrictive, so it can wick and still let you move. If it bunches, it can create hot spots or pressure points under your suit and harness. So that's why it tends to favor something that is fairly tight-fitting. This is one layer where you can save money without sacrificing performance. Spend your budget on the insulation layer, not your base. A basic synthetic long underwear set from sporting goods store can perform just as well as a Scuba specific option. Now comes the part where most divers guess at. How much insulation do you actually need for the water you're diving today? And the wrong answer can significantly make you too hot or too cold. Here's what most divers do. They buy one undergarment. Then they either freeze in the winter or overheat in the shoulder season. The goal is not to own 5 undergarments. The goal is to build a system that you can tune in minutes at a dive site. I'm going to give you temperature ranges as a starting point. Then I'll show you the modular add-ons that let you cover the gaps without buying a whole new setup. Now that you got your base layer sorted out, let's match your insulation to the actual water temperature you'll be diving in. I'm breaking this down into 4 ranges based on Celsius with Fahrenheit conversions for reference. For water 18 degrees or 64 degrees Fahrenheit or above, you're looking at lightweight undergarments, or possibly even just your base layer if it's that warm. Also, you really don't need dry gloves for these temperatures, making that part a little bit easier. You can just use wrist seals and your bare hand. Still, avoid cotton socks, but a light wool sock does wonders. Here's a mistake in this range. It's easy to overheat. People overdress, sweat on the surface, and then wonder why they feel so cold underwater when the water should be so warm. Think roughly 50 to 200 gram class of insulation, depending on the material and cut. Prioritize mobility and easy buoyancy control over warmth. If you're sweating on the surface, you're still overdressed for the dive. Of course, do what you can so that the time with you fully zipped up before splashing in the water is minimized so you don't overheat during that time. Between 12 and 18 degrees Celsius or 54 to 64 degrees Fahrenheit, you're in medium weight 200 to 400 gram territory. A single pair of wool socks is usually sufficient to keep your feet warm. This is when you start considering dry gloves, but you can get by with just wet gloves at the expense of some dexterity. And if you're on the edge, you can add a modular core that's going to be around your chest area for warmth, rather than jumping straight to a thicker undergarment. These are kind of vests, and they come in the form of heated vests or undergarments like this that just kind of cover that area and provide thick warmth into your core. Now, I highly recommend one because these really do cover the gap between like a heavier and a lightweight undergarment, and they provide quite a bit of warmth when you're kind of in those middle ranges. But from 6 to 12 degrees Celsius or 43 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, you need more of a heavyweight undergarment. In this range, you are really considering dry gloves strongly and decent hand insulation. Wet gloves for this cold tend to be thick and lack dexterity. A single pair of wool socks is still usually good enough for this range too. Here's the mistake in this range. People solve cold hands and cold feet by adding random bulky layers and accidentally make trim and buoyancy harder than it needs to be. Think of the add-ons as the stopgap in between insulation weights. Ideally, you just need your undergarment and nothing else. Maybe one vest to throw over. Heated vests can be a little bit easier to deal with than something like this because they add negative buoyancy, while this is adding positive buoyancy. Try to be evenly distributed so they're not adding a ton of positive buoyancy. And when diving in water around this range, you want around 400 grams plus, depending on brand and construction. Now, below 6 degrees Celsius or 43 degrees Fahrenheit down to freezing at 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, you're looking at maximum insulation. It's good to double up on wool socks. And in this range, you're definitely going to need dry gloves and likely multiple layers of glove insulation to keep your hands warm. You can even wear dry gloves with insulation and potentially a wet glove around it for a little bit added thickness. With these cold conditions, it's worth considering multiple layers of undergarments to increase loft and thickness. They stack to create an even thicker insulation total, kind of like what you do with wetsuits and the whole Farmer John thing. You generally want a combined insulation to be at least 550 grams plus of insulation. And if you wear it in layers, one layer should not be so tight that it smashes the lower layer. And here's the mistake in this range. Divers focus only on adding warmth and forget that every layer can change mobility, gas distribution in the suit, and how easy it is to manage buoyancy under stress. Not to mention losing a lot of hand dexterity with that thick glove. Many divers move to the warmest undergarments in a brand's lineup, and some divers layer 2 systems at this temperature. And of course, at this temperature, you really want to consider a vest or a heated vest. Heated vests use battery-powered elements to generate warmth, and they can be a major upgrade for extremely cold water. If you use active heating, avoid cranking it up during the descent and bottom time phase of the dive. The safer practice is staying thermoneutral on the bottom and using the warmth strategically while you start your ascent or the later part of your dive. Also, plan for failure modes because losing heat late in the dive can shift you toward the wrong thermal pattern at the wrong time. They do add complexity and cost if you're regularly diving in near freezing water. But here's where the modular approach really shines. Instead of buying a different full undergarment for every temperature range, you can use small vests, fleece overlayers, and hooded liners that you add or remove between dives, or depending on different conditions. A fleece vest over a medium weight undergarment can bridge the gap without needing a completely different setup. Just do consider the buoyancy properties of whatever undergarment that you're layering. You don't want it to be too uneven on the top or bottom. So consider quick swap pieces, fleece vest for core warmth, heated vest for the extreme cold, a heavy and light insulation under the garment. And you can even consider compression shorts for lower body insulation. The criteria for these pieces is simple. They should have minimal buoyancy impact and at least be evenly distributed for your top and bottom. They need to dry quickly between dives so you're not putting on wet layers for the second dive. And they can't restrict mobility or interfere with your dry suit seals. The art of layering is bringing multiple options to the dive site and adjusting based on your actual conditions and your personal cold tolerance. Water temperature is just one factor. Current dive duration, and your own metabolism all play a role. Some divers run hot and can get away with lighter insulation. Others need every bit of insulation they can fit. There's no universal answer, but modular pieces can give you flexibility without guessing. So warm enough to stay comfortable, not so hot you're sweating before you hit the water. That's the target. If you're remembering one thing, remember this: a dry suit keeps water out. Your layering keeps you warm, stable, and focused. And every dive is your adventure, and proper thermal management lets you focus on the experience instead of shivering through it. The more you know, the more you'll love and protect the ocean. Until next time.